So pre-work, so thinking about your why, get very clear about why you may want to apply for funding, right? So is it that you have a specific project in mind? Do you need some kind of equipment for your studio? Do you want to take a class or a workshop that you can't afford? Do you maybe just want to take 3 months off of your day job so you can concentrate on your work? Getting really clear about your why is important when you start looking for specific funders, because I promise you there are funders out there for all of these whys. There are funders who want you to take time off work and will fund that. There are funders who want you to buy that kiln or whatever for your studio. So getting really clear about what you want funds for. And then get really clear about who you are as a maker, as a creative, as an artist. And get as really kind of specific as possible. So think about, of course, like what mediums or medium you work in. Think about, are you an emerging artist or an established artist? So, you know, you're an emerging artist if you haven't had a solo exhibition. Basically, that's how a lot of places define it. So if you haven't had a solo exhibition, if you haven't had a lot of critical write-ups of your work, those are sort of factors that would mean that you're an emerging artist. Are you a self-taught artist, or did you go to school? Getting really clear and writing down who you are, that will help you find out kind of what niche that you fit in, and what funders, again, to keep an eye out for. Okay, get your shit together. This is so important. Again, even if you're not right at this moment looking for applying for grants or a specific grant, the earlier you can do these things, the better. So by get your shit together, I just mean, do you have a CV? Do you have, you know, essentially, do you have your artistic resume put together? So do you have that CV that includes all the exhibitions you've been in, includes, you know, articles that may have been written about your work, you know, publications that you may have been in, performances you've given, that kind of thing. And then part of getting your shit together is also putting together a portfolio. So again, don't wait until you're applying for a grant to do this. Do it now. Do it as soon as you can. And typically a portfolio consists of at least 10 really good images of your work, 10 to 20. So again, do that now, and make sure that that portfolio of your work is really the best examples of your work. So if you, you know, if you don't have 10 examples of work that you're super proud of, then maybe your portfolio is just 7. So just really include in your portfolio things that you are super excited to show other people. And then finally, an artist statement. If you don't yet have a solid artist statement, now's the time. Put one together. And that could be a whole other workshop, and maybe you're gonna have this writing an artist statement. But again, if you're a working artist and you don't yet have an artist statement, you need one. And so the reason, you know, that you should do all this stuff in advance, because all of these things, putting your portfolio together, creating a kick-ass CV and a kick-ass artist statement, all these things independently could take months to put together. They're very time consuming, especially to fine tune them and get them really, really good. So start working on them now. Don't wait until you're in that final couple days of the grant deadline to do these things.
Before you move on, Anna, we do have a question from Lane, if that's okay. Lane, go ahead.
Thank you. Anna, I was wondering, because I applied for a grant last night, And as far as the artist CV, I was really kind of at a loss because I am an emerging, self-taught, I have like this body of work that it's just stored in sketchbooks that I've never ever shown anyone. And that's kind of what I'm starting to do. So I just don't know how to translate that into a CV.
Sure. So did you say you are self-taught as well?
Yeah.
Cool. So, you know, have you shown your work anywhere publicly?
I came really close a few times. And
Sure.
I
Well,
never
so again, part of this,
let's put it that way.
sure. So, so everybody starts somewhere, right?
I've done like maybe 4 commissions.
Cool.
Oh, I was just gonna say I've done like 4 commissions
Yeah.
for like donations to bail funds. So I don't know how one words that as a professional. This is experience.
No, that's great. Absolutely. I think that anytime if you've done a commission, you've shown your work publicly, whether that's in a coffee shop or a gallery, again, or maybe you were published, and publishing, of course, can be on websites or in magazines, in zines, and wherever. Put all of that on your CV. But that's an important thing. You're definitely an emerging artist, and of course there are funders who want to fund specifically emerging artists. And so those funders know that emerging artists are not going to have a 5-page CV. They know that there's going to be very little experience. But as long as you have something that shows essentially that you're committed to putting your work out into the world, that's what is important. So, cool. All right. Well, thanks for that question. All right. So next slide here. The next pre-work thing is find your people. So really, this can mean if you work in one specific media, finding those media-specific organizations. So I have a list here of these are kind of academic oriented, but there are tons of other organizations that you should join as well. But I listed here the clay, metal, textile, photography, glass, curating, and then there's a socially engaged craft collective as well, and a performing arts professional group. But essentially what you want to do is just do a little online research looking for folks who are in your arena, right? So I promise you there is a kind of professional organization or an artistic organization for whatever medium you work in. And it's important that you, again, whether or not you're right now applying for funds or not, to get engaged with those organizations, because not only are those opportunities that they may post funding opportunities on their social media or on their website, it's also just important to become kind of well versed in the niche that you're wanting to play with, right? So it's just really important to get to know the group of people who also will likely be your competitors in applying for these grants. So getting to know what that community is, what voices are there, what kind of what's happening currently in those groups, in addition to, of course, staying in touch with these organizations for when funding opportunities do become available. And then specifically looking for grants, here's a list of some resources that I find really helpful. And so again, these are just a wide variety of organizations. The top one I really love, Artwork Archive. Every year they put together a list of resources, of funding resources. So they just came out with the 2021 guide. And then other local organizations. And I definitely, especially if you're an emerging artist, start local, start as local as possible, you know? So if you're in the Asheville area, definitely take advantage of everything the Asheville Area Arts Council is doing and listing, and the North Carolina Arts Council, South Arts, you know, start again regional and then kind of work your way out to more national organizations. So this is just a handful of resources that I kind of return to. And the last resource there, actually, the Artist You, is actually just a general resource for how to be an artist in the world, basically. But it is kind of the best resource I've come across for a really well-rounded approach of like how to fund your life as an artist, how to sustain your life as an artist. So I just always recommend that resource for anyone serious about you know, maintaining their livelihood and life as an artist. Okay, so yay, you have found the perfect grant. You've done all this pre-work. You went on those sites and you found the perfect grant to apply for. You found an organization that totally aligns with your own sort of artist mission, the work you're creating, and now it's time to apply for the grant. So the next like section of this presentation, I'm going to get a little more specific about when you have that grant application in front of you, some helpful tips on how to approach that. So you have this perfect application. Step one, I can't emphasize enough, read, reread, highlight, print out the instructions for the grant. I can't tell you how devastating it is to be in a selection panel, see somebody's work who is just fucking awesome, like they have such amazing work, but they forgot to submit a piece of the application. They forgot to submit a budget. They forgot to follow a bit of the instructions, and so their application is thrown out. You know, so sometimes that won't happen. Sometimes there'll be very generous organizations who will follow up with applicants. But if you're in a really competitive group, if you're applying for a really competitive grant, that is one of the sort of filters, the first filter that selection committees will go through. You know, if there are 400 applications and only 10 people can receive funding, all the applications that are incomplete are just going to be discarded, regardless of how awesome the work is. So please, please, please follow the instructions to a T. If the application requires letters of recommendation, ask for those letters right away. So even if the deadline for the grant is, say, 6 months out, give those folks that you want to ask for letters a heads up about it. I usually say that at least 2 weeks is kind. And also, when you're asking for those letters of recommendation, remind the person how awesome you are and why you're applying for this specific grant. So basically, you want to make it super easy for the person writing the letter of recommendation. You want to make it easy for them, and you want to make sure that they understand why you're applying for this grant specifically. They may have never heard of this grant or this organization, so tell them. So yeah, can't encourage that enough either. So important, if you are not a photographer yourself, please, please, please work with a photographer for your portfolio. After, you know, once selection panels have all the completed applications, the very first thing they're going to do, or if they're looking at it online, the very first thing almost always they're going to do is look at that portfolio. And if you have, again, if you have brilliant work, poorly photographed, it's going to look like not brilliant work, and they're going to probably discard your application. So I really can't emphasize enough, If you're not a photographer yourself, you need to work with a photographer to make sure that the images in your portfolio best represent your work. And for all the written components of the application, be specific and brief. You know, just really keep in mind that selection panels typically are looking through many applications when they're looking at yours. And you want to make it as easy for them as possible to read your application, to understand what you're trying to achieve. Don't say in 5 sentences something you could say in 1 sentence. It's really important to try to be as concise and as brief as possible. Okay, so this goes back to grants being a relationship. You really, in your application, you want to emphasize how you and the grantee are aligned. So everybody wants money, right? I mean, money is essential for life. And so the funders know that you're applying for this grant because you want money. But what they really care about and really want to know is why you as a specific person are applying for this specific source of funds. And again, because most funders really do think about the grant, the folks receiving grants from them as people they're entering a relationship with, they want to know that that your values are aligned with their values, right? And so this again goes back into why it's so important to do that pre-work and to really research organizations that you're applying to before you even start the grant application, so that you know upfront if the funder is an organization that you really see eye to eye with, right? If it's an organization that you believe in what they're doing, that you kind of can see similarities in folks that they've funded in the past with your work. So all of these things are super important. And you want to make that really, really clear in the application. That you know that they are a specific organization and there's a real specific reason why you're asking them for money. Okay, so make sure if there's a budget requested in the grant that you are really specific and well researched in the budget. So you know, if you're asking for $5,000 and you want that to fund basically a month or 2 off of work, be kind of specific about that, right? Like write in, calculate your the actual cost of living for a month, right? And don't inflate it. Like that kind of thing is very obvious to selection committees as well. We all could live on, you know, 20 grand a month, but realistically, you probably don't need 20 grand a month to live. So, you know, really think about what is your rent specifically? What are your costs specifically? And the same goes, of course, for, you know, if you're applying for, you know, a workshop at Penland, let's just say, you know, look at how much that specific workshop costs, and then, you know, calculate in travel expenses, like be real specific. Get actual numbers whenever possible for the budget. Okay, and then always have somebody read through your application before you turn it in. Even if you consider yourself a really excellent writer yourself, a really excellent proofreader, nobody's perfect and it's really hard to catch your own mistakes. So, you know, whether that's a friend, a partner, or a professional editor, have somebody else read through your application before you turn it in. And this is one, of course, that's really hard to do in practice, but I promise if you can get in the habit of not submitting at the last hour, you will thank yourself for it. Something always goes wrong at the last minute, whether that's your computer freaks out or something in your own personal life comes up that takes you away from the application. I usually like to trick myself by putting like on my calendar the due date as 2 days before the actual due date, so that I can just account for terrible things that will inevitably happen, you know, in the last day, the last hours that you're trying to submit. And then, of course, save your grant application. If you submit it online, make sure you're saving all of those documents and files somewhere else, so that you have those resources for future applications and also just as a resource. And then finally, of course, celebrate. Writing grants is hard. Like, you just put in a lot of hard work. Make sure to, you know, thank yourself for that, and feel proud of putting in all of that effort. All that effort is never wasted either. Even if you don't get funding for the specific grant you're applying for, I promise that the materials you put together for that grant application are going to come in super handy for future either grants or just, you know, professional opportunities. So, the end.